In this video, I'll show you how to use a macro I designed to facilitate easy communication between Reaktor and a network of AudioCubes. So first I want to do a little bit of setup in MIDI bridge. We want to turn the MIDI input and the MIDI output on for each cube, and we can leave the channels at their default values. We want to make sure that the inputs and the outputs are on different MIDI ports though, because if they're not, you can get a MIDI feedback error. The next thing we want to do is enable distance communication between the cubes, and we'll simply turn on the little CC button for each face of each cube. You want to go and zoom in on the controls and turn on the CC for every other cube in the network. So this takes a little bit of time, but it's easy enough, and when you're done, it's best just to save the work that you've done as a preset, and then you can just load it later and you'll never really have to worry about it again. So that's how to set things up in MIDI bridge. And just remember to make those changes for every cube in the network. Next, let's go to the audio and MIDI settings in Reaktor and make sure that we have our MIDI ports selected properly. So we're using this port as an output from MIDI bridge, which means we need to have it as an input in Reaktor. And we're using loop MIDI port A as an input in MIDI bridge, which means we want to use it as an output in Reaktor. Finally, you can create a new ensemble in Reaktor, go to the default instrument that opens up, and set the MIDI in and MIDI output to the appropriate values in the Connect tab of Properties. You don't need to do this step, but I like it just in case you have a more complicated ensemble with a lot of stuff and MIDI routing going on. It just makes the final process a little easier. So let's load up a copy of the macro I designed, and we only need to give it one piece of information, and that's the cube number. So I'll use cube 2 as an example here. If we go to the panel view, see that we get a bunch of information about this cube on the panel. For each face, we can see which cube that face detects and the distance to that cube directly beneath it. So let's demonstrate this real quick. In a simple network with 4 cubes, including the master, we've got cube 2 is the red cube in the center, and you'll see that as I place cubes 3 and 4 nearby, we're detecting those cubes at the appropriate face. So this is a fairly powerful macro that allows you to get a lot of data about the cube network very easily. I'm currently in the process of using it to make a modular synth, but there's a lot of things that you can do with it. And the values that are stored in numeric readouts on the panel view are also provided as outputs to the macro, so you can route them to anywhere in Reaktor and do with them what you will. So these top 2 outputs, for example, are the cube detected by face 1 and the distance to that cube. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you is how to use this macro to control the color of your AudioCubes dynamically, which can be very useful for letting the user know what function a given cube has in the network. I like to use a selector module in combination with a list to do this. Make sure you set the selector to be monophonic, and we'll use the list to control the position of the selector. I'll just create 3 entries as an example. I'll name them red, green, and blue. Give them values of 0, 1, and 2 respectively. And we can duplicate this selector for the green and blue inputs. So the top selector will output a value of 1 when red is selected and a 0 otherwise. The middle one will select 1 if green is selected, and the bottom one will choose 1 if blue is selected. So clearly the inputs to R, G, and B here are between 0 and 1. And as we change the value in the list, you can see the color of the audio cube changes along with it. Alright, so that's how to use my macros for interfacing with Reaktor and the AudioCubes. I hope you guys enjoy these and find something interesting to do with them.